Nice to be here. Nice to be here. My name is Frida Grimm, and I'm an assistant professor at the Center for School Leader Development at Umeå University in Sweden. And I'm here today to talk about one of my articles that I wrote 2 years ago about teacher leadership for teaching improvement in PLCs. At the center where I work, I do research about teacher leadership, professional development, and school development. I also teach principals and teacher leaders and work with schools that face various challenges. So that's what I do when I'm not presenting here. Today I'm going to talk about this article. Now I have to change like that. My paper, Teacher Leadership for Teaching Improvement in Professional Learning Communities, that was published 2033 in Professional Development in Education. And I will talk about it very briefly, of course, because I just have 15 minutes, and then we can take more detailed questions if you like in the discussion afterwards at the end of the webinar. But professional learning communities, in a wild definition, that is professionals who come together in a group or a community to learn. And the idea with that is that pupil learning can be improved by improving teaching practices. So by the social learning that teachers are doing in these PLCs, this can be seen as a means to improve teaching with the aim to enhance pupils' learning and results. However, that teachers meet in a group and talk about their teaching does not automatically lead to professional learning and teaching improvement. And therefore, it is important with conscious and informed leadership that can enhance and ensure learning and improvement in PLCs. And when you review the literature about PLCs and leadership, most literature is about principles leading for PLCs, like, for example, structuring the work, giving the teachers time to meet, and so on. However, the ones who are leading the work in the PLCs are mostly teacher leaders, and there is less research about how they do when they lead in these PLCs. So there is a knowledge gap here that I seek to contribute, filling with this article, one little small contribution. And this empirical study that I'm going to talk about today was done in Sweden, conducted in Sweden. And Sweden is interesting as a context because we have a lot of PLCs in Sweden right now. We have had this form of professional development for more than a decade in Sweden. Most schools today in Sweden are organizing professional development in PLCs. And we also have many teacher leaders. We have had teacher leaders in Sweden since the 80s, but there are more and more teacher leader functions in Sweden. And with more PLCs, there are also more teacher leaders who are leading PLCs, of course. And in this article, I talk about a specific teacher leader function in Sweden that is called first teachers. And I want to talk about that today, but they are specific in a special way. They have their specific assignments and so on, and this title as first teachers and so on. However, in Sweden, even though we have a lot of PLCs and a lot of teacher leaders leading in the PLCs, there is a discussion about, is this really efficient or not? Do they really, is it better with this professional learning and not just the traditional way of having professional development? For example, it takes a lot of resources to have teachers meet in these groups and use their time to talk about their teaching and try out methods and so on. And is it really leading to teaching improvement, and is it better for the students in the long run? So there is a discussion about this. And therefore, I wish to, in this article, I wanted to explore how to develop teacher leadership in PLC's conversation. So how can teacher leaders enhance professional development and teaching improvement through their leadership in a way? So the research questions in the article are: how is professional learning and teaching improvement encouraged in PLC conversations led by teacher leaders? What tends to be missing? And what influence do teachers claim that teacher-led PLC conversations have on their teaching practices? And I won't say so much about the method, but I did this study in 3 schools. I had done another study in these schools, so I already knew the context. I had already interviewed the teachers, the teacher leaders, the principals, the deputy principals, and so on in these schools about how they understood teacher leadership, and specifically first teacher leadership. So I knew the schools already, and then I talked with the principals and I asked them, do you have teacher leaders who are leading the work in PLCs that I can interview and observe? So then I got 3 teacher leaders that in different schools that I could interview and observe. So I started by having a pre-interview with each teacher leader, and then I observed them when they led their teacher colleagues. I also used a video camera to record the observations, so I could go back to my notes, but I could also go back to the video recordings and analyze them. And then after these PLC sessions, I also had, I conducted interviews with the teacher leaders again, but also with some of their colleagues that had been in this PLC session, other teachers. And I did this twice in every school, so I also could ask deeper questions with the time. So I could be in one observation and then ask them questions, come back, do a pre-interview again, do an observation, and then interviews again. And in this, I also use sticky notes. I won't talk about so much about it, but it was important with the sticky notes to also having them talk about implicit and explicit leadership practices. So in total, data material contains of 6 pre-interviews, 6 observations, and 18 interviews. When I went to previous research about leadership in PLCs, I concluded that there are specific elements that are important so that a PLC is really a PLC and not just teachers sitting in a group talking about their teaching. And from this, I constructed 3 building blocks, so to speak, as theoretical underpinnings. So from previous research, I concluded that there are 3 building blocks that are important in PLCs to have the quality and to get the teachers to really learn on a deeper level and to also improve their teaching in the long run. And those 3 building blocks are building a trustful and sharing culture. If you want teachers to sit together and talk about their teaching, you need to have this culture that is trustful, that you also dare to talk about your teaching, to open up about what you do in your own classroom, but also talk about what you think is difficult in your teaching. And that is a very important building block in a PLC. And there is a lot of literature about that. But it's also important to challenge current understandings of teaching and learning, because otherwise you will only acknowledge each other in the group and talk about what you do, but you maybe in the long run, you won't change anything. You will understand the learning processes of your students and of your own teaching in the same way. So in a PLC, it's also important to challenge current understandings about these issues. And then the third building block is about creating a habit of inquiry, that the teachers in the PLCs look into the teaching and look at it and also try out new methods, systematically evaluate what is happening in our teaching, what happens with the students and their learning process when we, for example, change various methods and so on. So from this, I had a theoretical underpinnings that I could use when I analyzed the material. And when I go to the results then and just give you a hint of them, I could see with these 3 teacher leaders that they were very good at creating trustful and sharing cultures in the PLC conversations. They knew the colleagues and they have close relation with them. They laughed together, but they also supported each other in these PLCs. And the teacher leader used acknowledgement as a means to encourage reflections and agency. And through this, they could encourage their teacher peers to talk about the teaching, to open up their classrooms for their teacher peers and discuss, this is working, this is not working, I tried this out, but it was difficult, I didn't even manage to do this, and so on. And in that way, it was very important to have this culture. On the other hand, when it comes to challenging current understandings of teaching and learning, I saw that they had many reflections about the teaching, and they talked very much about teaching and foremost about teaching methods, because they like to talk about concrete teams and to change methods with each other and to talk about, I use this method and it worked well, and so on. However, they did not challenge each other's perspectives. In the pre-interviews, the teacher leaders told me that I know it's important to challenge their understanding, so I will ask challenging questions and so on. But in the observations, I concluded that they didn't ask these challenging questions. And afterwards, I asked them, you told me that you are going to ask challenging questions, but I didn't see so much about that. What do you think about that? And then they were like, well, I saw that they were tired, it wasn't the right time, and so on. So they refrained to challenge current perspectives. They acknowledged their colleagues and told them that they did a good job, and so on. However, when it came to talking about things that they needed to change, it was trickier for them to really do that. And this was much because of strong egalitarian and autonomous norms in these groups. They talked much about that every teacher is equally good. The teacher leaders are not better teachers than the other teachers, so they shouldn't tell the others how to teach or what is good teaching or bad teaching. And every teacher should decide on their own how they want to teach in their own classroom. So it was more about in these PLCs to get inspired, to like change ideas, to try out methods, but not to be directed. And every teacher could decide on their own if they wanted to use a method or not in the long run with the students. So in that way, many teachers that I talked with afterwards, when I asked them, what did you learn in this PLC session and so on, they said, foremost, I learned that I'm good enough. I'm doing a good job. I get empowered when I meet my colleagues, and it's a hard job. So it's very important to meet my colleagues and to get acknowledged and to see that we do a good job. But actually, I haven't changed so much because I use these methods already, or I will probably not use it that much, and so on. So in the long run, it seemed, I didn't follow them over several years, so I don't know what happened in the long run, but I got indications that they didn't learn so much or change so much in the long run in their teaching. And so that was trickier for them, for the teacher leaders to do that, to build that building block. And the third building block then, creating a habit of inquiry, I saw that they foremost based the evaluation of the learning processes on a gut feeling. They tried out new methods with their students, and then they came back and they said, yeah, they found it very interesting, or they laughed and so on, but they didn't have a systematic way of following up what happened with the students' results in the long run or with their learning processes. So there was also a risk that they just changed one method to another method without really making it better for the students in their learning processes. So there was no systematic evaluations of how the method really worked out for the students. And in the article, I discussed then that the primary focus in these PLCs that I studied was about building trustful and safe learning environments, the first building block. And this strengthened the teacher's self-esteem and increased their self-efficacy, their belief in that I can change and do a better job, I can really improve my teaching, and changed their teaching practices. They tried out specific methods. They wanted to share and explore specific teaching methods and reflect on the teaching experience. So the teacher leaders were very important for that. However, this was not enough to ensure teacher learning and teaching improvement in these PLCs. So my conclusions from this article is that teacher leaders need to analyze and support teachers' learning processes and foster a habit of inquiry. And they also have to challenge norms and understandings about what it means to be a learning teacher and requirements to improve teaching practices in the long run. And what it means to learn as a teacher also is important to discuss more, I think, in the schools. I also, at the end of the article, I also raised the questions about the literature that is written for school professionals, because most literature that is practitioner-oriented is about the first building block, about building these safe and sharing cultures. However, that is not so difficult for these teacher leaders. They found it much more difficult to do this and to build the other two building blocks, to challenge perspectives and to build the habit of inquiry. So in the future, I think we need to do more research about that. How can they do this? Because this is very difficult for them. And how can we help them doing this through training programs and through literature and so on? So that were my conclusions from this study.